Hello there, this is Coach Ajit, and in today's video, I have a very special guest joining me in helping you becoming an even better coach. You see, metaphors and distinctions are powerful, and if you can learn how to design metaphors and distinctions in your coaching practice and then use it in your coaching sessions, you can have significantly more powerful coaching sessions with your clients. You will find that once you introduce metaphors and distinctions in your coaching practice, in your coaching sessions, while you're working as a life coach, a business coach, a health coach, a performance coach, or whatever kind of coaching that you're doing, that you are more communicative, more impactful to your clients. Now, I've invited my very special friend, a master coach, and an author inside EverCoach membership, Jason Goldberg, to this conversation. Now, while you're watching this video, I want you to be mindful of something. You see, Jason would be discussing many metaphors and distinctions. He'll be telling you a lot of stories around these metaphors and distinctions. A great way to really embody what you're gonna learn is to engage with it. And so I want you to take a hot second every single time you get something insightful from the video, every single time you feel like, oh, this was a great distinction for me or a great metaphor for me, I want you to make a note. I want you to leave that in the comment section below so we can identify between each other on how you're using all of this amazing information to create a transformative, new, a more evolved coaching practice. Another way to get better as a coach is to hit the red subscribe button and get a notification every single week as we release a new video. Now, without further ado, let's listen into the complete conversation that me and Jason had around metaphors and distinctions. I know there's so many topics we could have talked about, but one thing that I absolutely love when you coach people and when we have worked together, when you've coached me, is when you use distinctions.
Yeah.
Because you use them so powerfully, so beautifully, and so eloquently, and it just comes and it's just amazing. So I wanted to kind of diagnose that and take it apart and see how to really create that as a coach in my own life, and of course in the process be able to help other people also use those distinctions in their life. But before we even go there, let's first understand what are distinctions and why are they important.
Yeah, so really metaphors and distinctions are two of the major things I use in my coaching. Like they're not even officially modalities of coaching. This is not meant to replace any particular coaching. It doesn't matter what style you do. You could do motivational interviewing, or you're a 3Ps coach, or whatever coaching modality you have, that's great. Metaphors and distinctions are devices of language that help that coaching modality be even stronger, right? So what are they, right? So distinctions and metaphors essentially a lot of times are rooted in story. And you know, that's how we learn best, story, right? You're an amazing storyteller, like you focus so much on story in your work. And I think as coaches, we forget sometimes that story can be really, really important. Yes, the insights are inside of all of our clients, but a lot of times our egos get in the way and we can't see those answers. And so things like metaphors and distinctions can help kind of bypass that. So at its core, they're different. Metaphors are ways to kind of connect the known to the unknown. It's a way to take something that somebody can probably relate to that's completely outside of whatever problem they're stuck in right now, and to open their mind and open their possibilities to how that kind of related story could apply to what's going on in their life. And we'll dive a lot more into that. Whereas distinctions are something that I was introduced to first by my coach, Steve Chandler, who I know you love and who we both have followed for so long, is distinctions are very, very simply this versus that. Right? Mm-hmm. The simplicity of breaking down the most complex problem into the simplified this versus that. Because in the mind, this versus that we can deal with, right? Like if I go outside at night and it's dark, I don't need a 10-point checklist to remind me of what's going on. I go, oh look, it's dark. And tomorrow it'll be light, like light versus dark. Very easy, up versus down, left versus right, on versus off. It's things that inherently we say, yeah, that makes sense. It's just this versus that. So when we focus on distinctions, we give people an opportunity to say at any given moment, you could be living in this way or seeing the world this way, or you could be living in this way and seeing the world this way. Not that one's right or wrong, just here are some examples of what life looks like, and you have a choice moment by moment which one you want to follow. So at its core, again, all of these mechanisms of speech, all these mechanisms of language are meant to simplify the most complex problems that our clients are facing that they're stuck with, and to give them some kind of roadmap, some kind of blueprint to get back to their innate creativity and move forward in a productive way.
That's wonderful. And you can see just by the description of both those metaphors and descriptions how powerful they can be. Let's first diagnose metaphors, right? And like you briefly mentioned how powerful they are. Let's understand them a little bit better and diagnose what a good metaphor looks like, and how do you think about that? How do you get into a coaching conversation and utilize metaphors?
Yeah, absolutely. So the great thing about metaphors is that, I guess the gift and the curse about metaphors, it's not something that you would pre-plan and go into a session with, right? So I don't have a list of my metaphors to say, okay, before I get on the phone with a client, I'm gonna make sure that I work these 3 metaphors into the coaching, right? It's a lot of times it's in the moment. So over time, the metaphors will come to you more and more. But once you have them, what that allows you to do is you're sitting with somebody and you're trying to get a point across, and I'm sure you've experienced this, I've experienced this a ton. I've had amazing people in my life who have told me straight up, this is what's wrong, this is what you should do instead, and I never listen.
Yeah.
I don't listen, right? I'm in resistance, okay? And so I need some way to bypass resistance with my clients when they're feeling stuck. And metaphors do that. Because what metaphors do is, what happens is when our clients are stuck, and I'll just speak for myself, when I'm stuck, I know what's happening in my head, right? I wrote about this in Prison Break, the baby assassin, right? There's a baby assassin in my head, right? Yeah.
Metaphor.
So I have this little baby, he's like in a little ninja onesie, and he's like kicking and punching and chopping and all this stuff. And as soon as somebody like you, who's brilliant and one of my dearest friends and who I trust, and you could say, Jason, you're doing this wrong. The little baby says, oh wait, somebody's trying to change us. And they kick away your beautiful advice, right? But if instead you were to tell me a story, or you were to relate my problem to something that's not my problem, that's not the actual content of my problem, then the baby assassin says, oh, this guy Ajit, he's telling a story? Okay, that's fine, I'm gonna go take a nap. And he goes away. And now I'm open. Now I'm not resistant. Now you tell me the story of something that is gonna lead me to the exact same endpoint, but you're doing it in an entirely different way. So for example, if I were to come to you and say, you know, Ajit, you really shouldn't do things the way you've always done them just because you've always done them that way. If you were stuck with that, at best, you would say, yeah, dude, I know, I've read that a million times, doesn't help me, I'm still stuck, right? Or at worst, you would say, screw you, you don't understand my problem. You're just trying to fix me. But if instead I said, okay, Ajit, I'm curious about something here. I remember hearing this story about a woman who was cooking a pot roast for a family dinner. And her little son was watching her cook and wanting to get involved. And so the mom said, okay, I'm gonna teach you what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So she's prepping all the food, and before she puts the pot roast in the oven, she says, okay, and now we cut off the end of the pot roast and we put it into the oven. And the son says, but mom, why do we cut off the end of the pot roast? Doesn't make any sense. And she says, well, I don't know, that's just the way my mom always did it, and so that's the way I do it. So the little boy says, okay, well, that's not a good enough answer for me. So he calls the grandma, he says, Grandma, mom cuts off the ends of the pot roast before she puts it in the oven. She said you do that, and that's why she does it. Why did you do it? She goes, well, I don't know, my mom always did it that way, and so that's the way I do it. So he says, okay, I'm calling my great-grandma. So he calls her and he says, great-grandma, why is it that every woman in the family cuts off the end of the pot roast before they cook it? And the great-grandma says, well, when I was a young mother, we had a very small oven. And if we didn't cut off the sides of the pot roast, it wouldn't fit in. Now that's of course changed, none of that's the same. But if I tell that story and say, I'm curious, are there any places in your life where you're still cutting off the ends of the pot roast that maybe don't serve you anymore? And that can hit you at an entirely different level of creativity than me just saying to you, you need to stop doing things you've always been doing that way. That's the power of a metaphor. It outsmarts the ego. It puts the ego to sleep so I can talk to the best version of you.
That's a beautiful story, first of all. Secondly, is it that we are actually taking the problem outside and putting it into like third person almost by telling that story?
That's
right?
a huge part of it. That's a huge part of it because we get so stuck, and anytime I say we, of course I mean me, because I still get stuck with this stuff too. We get so stuck in having this disconnect between, we have our strategic mind that wants to solve the problem, right? And we have our creative mind that wants to like flow and figure out innovative solutions. And those things can't operate when we're at this level of thinking. It's funny, I actually saw you wearing your Einstein socks today. It brings up one of my favorite Einstein quotes. You can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it, right? So if you're at this low level of consciousness and you're feeling sad or you're feeling angry or you're feeling depressed and somebody tells you the best answer in the world, your mind can't reconcile it, right? But if you can raise that consciousness up, if you can be more creative, you can feel more relaxed and more light about your problem, then you start seeing possibilities, you start seeing opportunities. So whether it's you, like you said, kind of personifying the problem, taking it out of you and putting it as a third-party thing, and or attaching a story or a metaphor to it, it's exactly what you said, it's exactly what happens. It's no longer about me, I don't need to protect my ego anymore, and now I can be open to possibilities.
Is it because it is a creative process, like you mentioned, right? You have to be able to lean into that creativity as you're working with someone, as you're coaching somebody. Is it that, because again, it needs a lot of presence of mind to be able to think in metaphors. A lot of times, like you said, we want to get to the rational point, especially when we are just starting out as a coach, or even if you're a seasoned coach, often you want to get to the answer because you have like an hour and then you need to do everything within the hour and so forth. What would you suggest for somebody who wants to embody, and I'm one of that person. This is a selfish question, selfish question as much, is how do you bring in more metaphors in your coaching? Do you think of the common themes? I'm just blabbering it out, right? Do you think of the common themes that tend to come up in your type of practice and say, hey, let me build out some metaphors for that? Or is there a different way to do this?
That's beautiful. So to me, there's two kind of main ways to create metaphors, and one's kind of a top down and one's kind of a bottom up. And so what you just said to me perfectly is the top down. So the top down is you say, what are my clients struggling with? Sit down at the end of a session that you have with a client, and regardless of how good or bad you think it went, and of course we have no idea how good it really goes, that's on the client, but no matter how good or bad you think it went, take a minute and say, okay, they were really struggling with this. And I was pointing and I was asking powerful questions, but they still seem really stuck. What would have been a lighter way that I could have presented an insight? How else could I have pointed to that thing through metaphor? Where are there instances of things that have happened in my life, or stories that I've heard from others, or times that I've been coached that maybe my coach shared a story or a metaphor with me? In the future, if I have that challenge with a client, how might I approach that differently than just asking a question? So to your point, just kind of looking back and debriefing on your own about the session you just had and saying, what could I do? How could I make this a little easier for them to understand or to lower their resistance? That's top-down approach. The bottom-up approach is something that I do a lot. I truly believe there's content in everything. Like it's a joke with me and my students and my team. Like anytime anything happens, you stub your toe and we say there's content there. Your flight gets delayed, there's content there. Like there's content in everything. That means there's always metaphors in everything as well. So I can scan my day at the end of the day and just write down what I did. I'll look at my calendar and I'll be like, okay, I had a coaching session with this person, I had lunch with this person, I had my haircut, like whatever it is. And I'll just say, what was it that happened in there? Just a very mundane, everyday thing that I may be able to relate to something my clients might deal with. And so, for example, just the other day, we're here in Pula, Croatia. I went and got my haircut. I don't know if you saw this Facebook Live that I did in the group. And I'm blind without my glasses, okay? I'm totally blind without my glasses. So when I go into a barbershop in a new country, it's one of the scariest things I do when I travel internationally. You know very well how much I care about my hair. And so it's a very scary thing for me to walk into a barbershop where there's a language barrier. I don't know if they're any good, all these things. So I find this barbershop and I had one recommendation. So I said, okay, I'll trust this person enough. And if I need to stop being friends with them after, that's fine. But somebody told me, check it out. So I go in there, I have to take off my glasses. I can't see anything until they're done with my hair. I show them a picture, hope they know what to do. And then I sit there, get my hair cut, put my glasses on. It looks good, I leave. So I'm walking down the street, and because I always want to find ways that I can serve the people that I work with or create content or through coaching or whatever, I say, what's the lesson? There's got to be some lesson in me getting my hair cut, just to see if there's something there. And I realized that me going into a barbershop, that I have no idea how good the work is, and then I have to take my glasses off so I can't even see the product until the end. What a beautiful reminder that is about surrender, right? Mm-hmm. About not having control over every outcome. About showing up. I did a little bit of research. I got a recommendation from somebody. I made sure when I sat in the chair that I didn't move my head all around so it would get all messed up. I did what I could do, and then I had to surrender and allow the rest to just occur. And to also remember, what's the worst case that can happen? He screws up my hair? Resilience. Hair always grows back. For most people, hair always grows back.
Thank
that
you.
was not
Thank
personal.
You, that was very personal. Thank you for putting it right in there. Thank you.
But
this is choice.
But the point is, if I went out there, if I was talking to a client and they were worried about putting themselves out in the world, or they were worried that they didn't know how everything was going to unfold and what if they fail, I could say, well, don't worry, just surrender and be resilient. They'd say, what am I paying you for? Really? I could have got that on a bumper sticker. But if I tell this story about what's happened in my real life, they go, oh, okay, I see how that applies in my real life. Their ego was just outsmarted, because I'm not trying to solve the problem anymore. I'm trying to make the problem not so big of a problem to begin with.
That's beautiful. And you said some really amazing things in there. Would you say, and there was one great exercise that you gave there where you said, okay, at the end of the day, you could just write down what happened, and that's a great approach to really find those stories. Are there any other techniques or strategies or ideas that you may have for individuals who are maybe not naturally thinking about what is it to learn here?
Yeah, I think the key thing is every day is to prime yourself for where there may be something that you can share with other people that would be helpful. And so this is why it's so important to be reading, or to watching educational videos, watching coaching mastery stuff. Like anything you watch or read or listen to can be input to a metaphor. but we have to prime ourselves. We have to open ourselves up to the fact that this stuff is everywhere around us. So having the practice of every day, again, at the end of the day, kind of scanning your day, and you can also do it the other way around. So the way I mentioned about scanning your day first and then seeing if you can find something that you could teach, you could also start and say, you know what, there's something my clients are always facing. They always get stuck on this. And then as you go through your day, ask yourself, is there anything in that lunch that I could have pulled out for that problem? Is there anything in that meeting I could have pulled out for that problem? It's a matter of just priming yourself and knowing that the seeds for metaphors are all around you if you're open to seeing them.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that exercise because it gives so many nuggets, not only in context of being able to coach with metaphors, but also just how to really take all the practice that you have as a coach, or all the results that you're driving for your clients as a coach, to really draw them into stories and metaphors, to be able to utilize them in their online content, which I know you're a master at as well, to be able to just utilize that in a daily basis. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I think it's a very powerful tool to be able to utilize that. Now, we've talked about metaphors. Is there something in there that I skipped or I should have asked around metaphors?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I think the big thing I want to make sure people get is that you're not meant to be like a master of metaphors the day you learn about this, right? Like some of this is kind of, it's just like everything in coaching and probably a lot of things in life. It's part art, part science, right? So the priming part is, the reading and making sure you're being coached, or making sure you're being really present after your own coaching sessions. That stuff's all great. But the rest of it is kind of more of an art. And the more present you are in your coaching, this is another reason to be super present in coaching, is that a lot of times metaphors come up for me in real time in coaching because I'm actually visualizing what somebody's going through, right? Mm-hmm. So it's one thing for somebody to say, I'm really stressed at my job. But when I'm visualizing them like sitting at their desk and like rubbing their temples because they're so stressed out, like when I actually see them in the midst of whatever they're doing, for some reason it triggers more story and metaphor. Now I don't know if that's maybe just me, I'm not saying that's for everybody, but there is something about the point of a metaphor is to create a motion picture in your head, to create a movie in your head. You've probably seen this. There's so many people who can recite like word for word full scenes of a movie, but they don't know their best friend's phone number, right? Mm-hmm. Why? Because moving pictures stick with us. So the power of a metaphor is that you're creating a picture, a motion picture in somebody's head, and they can attach that a lot more easily than just you speaking direct words on whatever the problem is.
Now let's move on to the topic of distinctions. Let's first understand, you explained briefly what distinctions were, but let's go a little bit deeper on really understanding the power of distinctions. And then let's understand how to even develop distinctions.
Yeah, I smile when you said it because I really I can attribute so many of the things that have happened for me in my career to distinctions. And as I mentioned, Steve Chandler was the first one to introduce me to distinctions. And it was just such a simple thing. Like I love simplicity. Like I'm not that smart. Like I need really like simple things that I can anchor into. And so it's funny because I have basically one main distinction. That's my entire book. Prison Break is built off of one main distinction. So when people think of like the power of a distinction, it's powerful enough to literally write an entire book around. It's powerful enough to do entire keynotes or to do entire courses. It's powerful enough to shift your client in a major way. So as an example of one that I really, really love, I was coaching a guy who was a general manager for a property management company. And he had like these 10 or 12 people that reported to him. And he was feeling really energetically drained because they would come to him with all their problems all the time, and he felt very responsible for fixing all their problems. He took it on very personally when they were having hard days at work or if they were feeling stressed. He took it all onto himself. And what I was really trying to point to for him was like, dude, it's not your responsibility, right? You're not responsible for all these people's stuff, but when you're in it, right, when you want to help, and I say, you're not responsible, he says, again, why am I paying you? Like everybody tells me I'm not responsible. I still feel responsible. So the power of a distinction is to say, cool, here's what reality looks like for you now, right? You believe you're responsible for these people. Great, let's not call that wrong. Let's just say that's your current reality. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what is something that's the opposite of that doesn't negate what he's feeling, doesn't trivialize what he's feeling, doesn't make him feel stupid or wrong or shamed because he's doing something that's not effective? What if you just say, great, that's there, the responsible thing, and what if there's some other version of this that still allows you to feel the way you want to feel? It doesn't take away the fact that you care for your people. It doesn't take away from the fact that you want them to succeed, but relieves some of this pressure, right? That lightens you up a little bit. And this is my whole purpose in coaching, is for people to be lighter because there's so much heavy stuff out there. So as we're talking about it, this distinction, this versus that pops in my head, and I ask him, I say, what if instead of you being responsible for their happiness, that instead you would do anything you could to contribute to their happiness, right? Responsible for versus contributing to. And so we start talking about that. I said, how does that land with you? How does that feel? Does that feel like you're still caring for them? Does it feel like you're abandoning them? So it's presenting this distinction and then saying, I'm not saying this is fact, this is how it is. I say, I'm just curious. If you were to try this on, how does that feel? And immediately he felt so much lighter. He's like, well, if I was just here to contribute to their happiness, then when they came in with problems, I would sit with them, I would do anything I can to help, and I would send them back out in the world, but I wouldn't continue ruminating on it and playing it back in my head after they left. Or if somebody was thriving and they wanted to be promoted, I'm not responsible for getting them a promotion, but I want to contribute everything I can to their growth and their development. And immediately, right there, without any deep work, without figuring out if he had abandonment issues from his childhood and why he was carrying this forward, it was just presenting something that was light and easy for him to say, okay, now when people walk in my office, I have a very clear this versus that. When somebody comes in and sits down, am I going to try to be responsible for them? Which if you do, that's fine, that's your choice. Or am I going to shift into just contributing to whatever it is I hope that they want to feel? And that was a huge shift. And that one insight has carried him through and has completely revolutionized the way he feels about his job.
That's amazing. And how did you even get to that point? And I know Prison Break itself is a great premise of distinction. I would love for you to touch on that, because that was really powerful when I saw you do one of your keynotes based on Prison Break, basically. But let's go there in a couple of minutes. How do you even get to a point where you know that's the distinction to go for? Yeah. Is there a way to get there?
Totally. For me, the easiest way that I found, and it's the way I did all of my distinctions that I use now, and I have maybe a dozen or so that I go back to on a fairly regular basis. They all started with me looking at what does my current reality look like? And what would I love my alternate reality to look like? What would I love an ideal reality to look like? If I wasn't living a default life, if I had some kind of actual free will and choice in how my life looked, how might it look differently? Now, this is not to get like the one word. This is not to get like the clever marketing slogan distinction. This is just in general, like how does life look? How does life feel? Mm-hmm. So if we look at the prisoner run, right? So Prison Break. So Prison Break is based off of the distinction of self-leader versus prisoner. At any given moment, you can be a prisoner of circumstance or you can be a self-leader in your life. So how did I come up with that? I sat with how my life felt pre-2009, 2010, right? When I was at my highest weight, 332 pounds, when I was at my most stressed, my most depressed, the highest level of antidepressant medication I'd ever been on, like the kind of lowest point in my personal life, highest point in my career at that point, but yet still the lowest point in so many other areas of my life. And looking back now that I had done the work on that is like, what did it feel like? And I really sat with that, and I was thinking like, in my body, like 300 pounds and not being able to move around really well and clothes always feeling tight. I felt like such a prisoner in my body. Like I just felt like I was being held captive inside my body. And then I thought about how my mind felt, how my daily life felt. And I felt like I was a prisoner to my job. And I was a prisoner to everybody's obligations and expectations of me and demands of me. It just felt like I was like literally locked in a prison. And so I said, okay, so prisoner, that's gonna be part of my distinction. Like I feel like a prisoner. So then the next step is to say, okay, well, if I wasn't a prisoner, if that's my current reality or was my current reality, what would my ideal reality look like? How would it feel like if I totally was able to flip that over? And I said, well, I guess if I didn't feel like a prisoner, I'd feel like I was in control of my life. Like I wouldn't feel like somebody else was controlling me. I would feel like I was making decisions that were based on what I wanted, right? I would feel like a real leader in my life. Like I'd feel like I was really leading myself in the world. I said, oh, leading myself, self-leader. That works. That sounds good, right? So all of a sudden now, just by kind of processing what my life used to look like and what I would love my life to look like, by looking at what I would love to have more of in my life and what I would like to have less of in my life, I'm able to come up with a distinction and say, this is what it could look like, or this is what it does look like sometimes, and this is what it could look like. And the beautiful thing about that is that with distinctions, it doesn't always mean all or nothing. So when I wrote the book and have this distinction, for me, and at least in that distinction, and for most distinctions, probably all distinctions, it's not about getting to one side of the distinction and never going back, right? So it's not about like, okay, prisoner versus self-leader. Now I know what a self-leader is, so now I'm gonna be a self-leader forever. It's like, no, this is your reference point to go back to. And when something stresses you out, or somebody triggers you, or something is not going according to plan, you have the distinction in front of you to say, okay, in this moment, given what's happening in my life, I can choose to use the principles that I've learned from the book about being a prisoner, and I know what that feels like because that's default, or I can choose to use the principles that he laid out to be a self-leader. No right or wrong, you choose whatever you want, but the key is that you recognize in that moment, I'm choosing it. So for me, I still have prisoner moments, But now I know that I'm having a prisoner moment. I know that I'm choosing that side of the distinction. And if I know that that exists, it means I also know the other side exists, and I can make decisions in that direction if I want to. So it's just about having something very simply that people can key into and they can identify themselves with, right? Distinctions are great for helping people to embody an identity. Am I somebody in this moment who's going to be responsible for the person that's sitting down in front of me? Or am I somebody who's just going to contribute to the person who's in front of me? Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. I'm trying to process as to how is it that it's like you mentioned while you were speaking, you create reference points. And because you're creating these reference points for your clients, what's happening is they can always go back to it in your conversation with them because you created the reference point. So you have full, okay, that's where they're operating from, their default. Like you mentioned, your default's prisoner, and you're operating from prisoner all this time versus going to self-leader. I understand that distinctions are discovered or kind of pointed out as the coaching conversations are happening, but how do you go back to, or how do you reference them back, and do you reference them back often?
Yeah, it's such an important thing to reference it back. I really truly believe, and this is mainly from my experience of being coached, there's typically, at least for me, I won't say this for everybody, I'll just speak my own experience. If there's probably one thing that my coach could point me back to, 99 times out of 100, that would solve all my problems. I don't need to have all these different modalities and all these different things. If my coach just keeps pointing me back to the one thing that at some point during our coaching I knew to be true, then I'll be okay, right? So let's say I introduce a distinction and the person that I'm coaching is on board. They go, wow, that makes sense. I really got an insight from that. I'm gonna start practicing that. If that really works for them, then anytime they're stressed out or struggling, I just wanna point back to that thing. Do you remember that time that I talked about this thing and you really got the insight and you started practicing it and it felt really true for you? Can we just go back to that for a minute? And when we do that, all the other stuff kind of melts away. We don't have new stuff to work on. It always points back to that old thing. So yes, 1,000%, I would love to go back to that. And when they're maybe, I feel like they're in prisoner mode, I may just ask, hey, can we slow things down for a second? And they say, sure. I'm just curious. Do you remember a few weeks ago we talked about the prisoner versus self-leader? And they go, yeah, I remember. How are you feeling right now? Do you feel like more of the prisoner mentality is taking over? Or do you feel like you can see a possibility for the self-leader to step in? It just slows them down and they remember the insight, they remember the distinction, and they can ask themselves and they could say, you know what, I think I'm being a little more of a prisoner right now. Cool, that's awesome, great to notice. What might it look like to step 5% more into self-leadership? I'm not telling them to do anything, I'm not asking them to do anything, I'm just curious, exploring. Let's say you're gonna be prisoner for the rest of your life, fine. But what might it look like if we go 5% more self-leader? And again, that outsmarts the ego because we're not saying change everything. We're just going back to one thing that you felt to be true for you at some point, and we're going from there again. So yeah, referencing that, hugely important.
What you just said is such a masterclass in behavioral change. I want to just point that out because it immediately triggered me back to one of the conversations, one of the books that I read called Atomic Habits by this guy called James Clear. And he did this big research on how people shift behaviors or change behaviors. And one of his key insights in the book is people change not because of the outward processes and all those things, but because their identity changes. Is because they see themselves differently is why they change. And that causes a long-term change, not just a temporary change. So if you see yourself as a self-leader, it'll cause a behavioral shift. And all the processes and systems that need to follow for you to act like a self-leader is a follow-up step that'll just put itself together just because your identity has shifted. I feel that the distinctions that you're mentioning and the distinction that you just mentioned, especially for the prisoner versus self-leader, is like an identity shift almost of you not seeing yourself as this person and seeing yourself as that person. And distinctions is such a powerful way of changing identity. And changing that identity could be transformative for a client, right?
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but that's perfect. That's exactly what it does. Like it is an identity shift because how hard is it again to just tell somebody, hey, shift your identity.
It's never gonna happen.
Stop being who you are.
Yeah.
First of all, stop being who you are is crappy anyways, right? Then it's like judgmental. But even if it's like, hey, I would love if you weren't who you are, that doesn't work either, right? So I love what you said. It really is an identity shift and it invites them to take ownership of that identity shift if they want to, right? For me, it's always an if you want to. I'm committed to whatever you're committed to as a client. I don't need you to be anything different than what you are. But if you're here sitting with me, there must be something you want to be different. And normally that's an identity. There's something that everybody wants to step into that's an identity. I want to be more courageous. I want to be more bold. I want to be more creative, whatever it is. That's an identity shift. So I think I'd never thought of it that way, but I love that you said that because distinctions really are an identity shift tool.
It's beautiful. And actually, I love what you just said, which is another masterclass, I think, in being how you want to be as a coach, because I think that was powerful what you said. You just said it in passing, but to be able to say, hey, what if you want to be, I'm kind of paraphrasing and probably butchering your words, but kind of what it summarized to me, and that's why I think it's a masterclass, is because you said, I acknowledge for who you are and what you want to be. We are sitting together because you are committed to your growth, so on and so forth. So I love you for that, and let's see how we can create that. So I think as a coach, it's a great learning moment and a great masterclass in saying, hey, your client that is sitting across to you is amazing, beautiful human being who wants to create progress in their life. And what you have to see is what are they willing to commit to and how can you cause that identity shift? Yeah. Butchering your words, but kind of that's why I was like, that's a great moment. I want to capture that, what you just said.
I'm glad you said that. And one thing I'll add to that, because I think it's important, and I know that I forget about it sometimes when I dive right into what these tools and things are. Having tools like metaphors and distinctions and story does not make you immune from first creating rapport and safety with your clients, right? So just because you have these great tools that help shift people, they're even not as powerful unless you've already had some kind of rapport established with people. So I wouldn't say get on the phone with somebody or meet somebody at a party and immediately go into a distinction or a metaphor for them, right? You still have to do all the normal things you do for coaching. But if you've established that rapport, you've established that safety, you've established powerful agreements or whatever it is that you do when you coach a client, and then you layer in these things like the metaphors, distinctions, and story, then like you were talking about in James Clear's book, then every other strategy you lay on top of that afterwards is exponentially more successful because they have shifted their identity of who the person is they're going to be when they're carrying that stuff out. So I love that that's another little masterclass that you just laid out now, was to make sure that we have that fundamental level of the rapport and the trust and the safety, layer on the stories and the metaphors and distinctions to help people shift their beliefs, and then go into strategy. But if any of those are either missing or out of order, you're not going to have the same impact with your clients.
Is that your flow?
Yeah.
Rapport, what was the steps, just so that we capture that as well?
So rapport, trust, safety, agreements, right? So kind of the meta of the coaching, right? Really making sure that they understand that I'm here for them, and like we were just saying, that I don't need them to be any different, that I'm committed to whatever they're committed to, and that I love them unconditionally, right? That's just par for the course, because so many people feel like it's not okay to just be who they are. Right, they just don't feel like it's okay, and you've probably seen this. There was a study on subject lines that were sent out in emails, and they wanted to see what was the most open one. And one of the most open ones was "You are not alone." We struggle so much to feel like however we are is okay. That as coaches, you can create massive change in people by telling them that they don't have to change, which sounds counterintuitive. But if I say to you, you're perfect the way you are, and if there's something you think would make life even better, let's explore that. Now we're in a good place. So yeah, that's the bottom kind of foundational level. Then as we're talking about where they're stuck, or even not even just where they're stuck, maybe where they want to go and they're just not sure what to do with that, then we start layering in these stories, these metaphors, these distinctions. Then as a result of that, best case scenario is that they just feel really light. They go, oh man, I was making that a way bigger deal than it needed to be, or I was taking that way more seriously than I needed to. The level of access to consciousness and creativity they have in that moment means when you do invite them to look at a certain strategy, they're not in this, no, that worked but for me, that would, no, I've tried, nope, that's not, and it's just this. It's metaphorically crossed arms, right? And when you tell these stories, these metaphors, distinctions, and you have that baseline of rapport, the arms kind of unfold. And they're like, okay, I'm open to exploring that, and then you can get into strategies.
Beautiful, beautiful. How do you identify distinctions?
For me, it's always when I'm looking for my own, and it's now sometimes because I've done it enough, it happens in session. But if I'm kind of sitting on my own and just trying to kind of create them, whether it's for content creation or I'm doing what we said earlier, looking through a challenge my client had and I want to create a distinction for them, I want to start with the worst case scenario. I want to start with what feels like crap, what like I wish would just go away and I never had to feel it again. And so all of my distinctions, I remember one of the ones I created, I always say that I had, in my real hardcore, almost all the time prisoner days, I had two mantras. We have mantras in personal growth. I want to be the spirit of the world embodied and love all the children and all the plants, or whatever we say. I had my own mantras back then, and one of my big mantras was, that's just the way I am. I can't change. That's just who I am. So I would yell and scream and get angry, and people would say, why do you do that? Why do you get so angry when someone cuts you off in traffic? That's just the way I am, right? And so I wanted to have a distinction around that, because I know from doing the work on myself now, it's not just the way I am. I was able to change. But again, I don't want to go to somebody and say, you can change, right? And they're like, yeah, thanks, bro. Really helpful. Yeah. So I started thinking about that. Man, that felt really bad. Like I just was always saying, that's just the way I am. It was like a medical diagnosis, right? Like I went to a doctor, oh, well, we've run the tests. That's just the way you are. Like, that's how it felt, right? So I started thinking about that. I was like, yeah, it feels like a diagnosis. That's just the way I am. Like I've diagnosed myself. And that could be for anything, right? Like I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. I've diagnosed myself. I said, well, what's the truth here? What's actually going on, right? And personally for me, I love language. I love alliteration. I love like having the same letters on distinctions whenever possible. That's kind of advanced, but whatever. So I'm looking at that and I said, okay, it feels like a diagnosis. What's really true? Like when I say that's just the way I am, what's really happening? And I realized, oh, that's a decision. I'm choosing in that moment to be somebody who says that's just the way I am. And so this distinction became diagnosis versus decision. And so when I share that with somebody, I say, great, so you're feeling like you're not good enough, or this is just the way I am, I can't change, awesome. So let's look at this. Either it's something that you're creating as a diagnosis, unchangeable, like a disease, like a cancer, or it's maybe just a decision that you're making in this moment based on previous stories you have. Do either of those feel true to you? And when you invite somebody to look at it that way, and it's not a judgment, and you share your own story of where you've experienced that as well, which is huge, to go first. And one of my rules is I never instruct unless I first confess, right? Never instruct unless you first confess. So I may confess that myself, but I present that to them and they go, that's interesting. I have been saying that about myself like it was a diagnosis, but I can see now, like I have been, and they may even say, but I don't know how to change it. Fine. Can we just agree that maybe it's something that's not a diagnosis and it's just a decision? Little incremental, micro-serving steps that are raising them up their ladder of consciousness to be more open and more creative. All that stuff is a win.
That's beautiful. Is there an example you would like to share where you used metaphors and distinctions, maybe in combination? I mean, you kind of shared that, but just to make it more explicit as an example, would you be able to go, okay, this was a coaching session, let me just tell you about how it unfolded, so we could see as coaches, how does it unfold? Of course, it's not a standard, it won't happen every single time. That's a disclaimer for anybody that's watching, but just to have like an insight towards, okay, this is how it looks like and this is how it becomes powerful.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll say really quickly about metaphors, metaphors can be completely made up, and that's fine. It's not, you're not lying. Like you make
like up Jesus never really went to the,
Well, as far as you know. So it doesn't have to be real. It can be made up, but it can also be real. It can be a real story from your life, right? So just in case people are like, well, I don't have any of these like amazing stories that have happened. Great, go look at Zen koans. Go look at parables, go look at other wisdom and just pull out the nuggets. You don't have to be sharing original metaphors and distinctions. You can use other people's, that's fine too, right? As long as it makes a difference for the client. So the reason I say that is because this one was based off of more of a real thing that happened. I was talking to a client and they were really struggling with something and they said to me, well, you know what? I think I just need to think positive. And I said, or you don't. I don't actually advocate thinking positive. They said, what do you mean? You're a coach. Like, you want everybody to think positive. You're the joy guy, you're the play guy, think positive. I said, well, maybe. I said, do you mind if I tell you a story? I said, yeah, fine. I said, I was sitting in this coffee shop not too long ago and I'm just kind of working and I hear these two women next to me and they're talking and the one woman saying to the other woman, you know, I don't know what's happening. There's this big restructuring at work. There's a whole new company that came in and acquired us and there's all these layoffs and, you know, almost my entire team has been laid off and I'm just so worried that I'm going to be next. And her friend, who was so well-meaning, sitting across from her said, you know what, girl, you just think positive. You just think positive, girl. Everything's going to turn out okay. And I was like, oh no, don't think positive. That's terrible. And my client said, why? Why is that terrible? And I said, well, let me tell you why. This woman is at a job. She would like to keep her job, but she's worried that she's not going to have her job. She's going to get laid off. If she's just thinking positive, then she's going to be in this very passive state, sitting at her desk, crossing her fingers and hoping she doesn't get laid off. But what if instead of positive thinking, we focused on possibility-based thinking? What if she really sat down and thought to herself, man, these new managers coming in, I bet they are so stressed out. They have all new procedures, all new SOPs that have to be adopted by the company, and people are flailing and people are getting laid off and people are worried they're gonna have to do more with less. If I'm in a real creative place of possibilities, I'm gonna go to my new boss and say, listen, I know this is probably super stressful. You guys are trying to get everybody to adopt these new procedures, these new processes, people are getting laid off. Whatever I can do to help, to get people on board with what it is you're bringing in, let me know, and I wanna help. That level of possibility-based thinking, instead of doing this at your desk all day and hoping that nothing bad happens, can actually move you forward. So in your particular situation, can you see how instead of thinking positive, you would think possibility-based could move you forward? And immediately they got it. Why I didn't advocate positive thinking and instead to be more creative. So that's a distinction, positive versus possibility-based, but it's wrapped and nested inside of a metaphor or a story.
That's amazing and wonderful example to kind of summarize and box it all together, everything that we've talked about, metaphors and distinctions. Is there something that I'm missing, or a question that I should have asked, I could have asked, that I might have missed, that would illustrate the point and also allow our listeners and watchers to be able to say, now I have the toolkit I can take and create my metaphors and create my distinctions. Did I miss something?
I think you did a really good job. So I don't think there's anything specifically missing. I think the one thing I just want to make sure people know is, and I said it at the beginning, but I want to reiterate, you're not meant to watch this and then become a metaphor master, right? This is an invitation, right? Like I can watch David Blaine videos all day of him levitating above New York City. And if I watched a video where they even told me how he did it, I wouldn't be able to go out tomorrow and do it, right? Because there's a difference between knowing kind of how it's done and just flexing the muscle, doing it yourself. So I would say anything you can do to be practicing this on your own in your own time without any pressure, not worrying about doing it in session, but actually just taking the time. Like if you have hour-long coaching sessions, block them out for an hour and 15 minutes. And at the end of that hour, when you're done with your client, sit for 15 minutes and reflect and just ask yourself, where could there have been a story, a metaphor, or a distinction that could have helped? That's the one thing I would say. The last thing I would say is that look at things like the work that I do, or look at any other people that you respect in the industry who are using metaphors and distinctions, and start reverse engineering what they've done, right? Look at their metaphor and say, that's interesting. If I had been getting my hair cut and had to take off my glasses, would I have seen the same thing? Or maybe, actually, I wouldn't have seen that. I would have seen something else entirely. So look at people who have come before you and reverse engineer that, and it just primes your mind to see it more and more often.
Wasn't that one of the most powerful information that you have probably received in recent times around becoming a better coach using metaphors and distinctions? If you would like to bring more interesting coaching practices in your coaching career, if you'd like to have more meaningful impact with your clients, introducing metaphor distinctions and many other models like that in your coaching practice might be what you're looking for. And that is why I want to introduce you to EverCoach membership. You see, we here at EverCoach truly believe that we can help you become an extraordinary coach. And the more extraordinary you become as a coach, the more impact you get to have with your clients, the more abundance you get to create in your life. And our effort here is to give you that. We want you to have more abundance. We want you to impact more lives because the world needs you. And because of that, we are offering EverCoach membership, which gives you not only access to a full 4-week quest with Jason around metaphors and distinctions, but 12 other quests that will enable you to become a better coach and build a coaching business which will help you thrive. I know you love this video. This was such good information and so useful, right, in our coaching careers. So don't be shy and hit that like button. Share it with a friend that can use this information. Share with me in the comment section below which metaphor or which distinction stood out for you and that you will be using in your coaching career going forward. And if you haven't, for whatever reason, haven't hit that red subscribe button and you still see it glaring at you, go ahead, hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so every single time we release an amazing video like this one, you get a notification and we get to talk again. Thank you so much for joining in today. This is Coach Ajit and you're watching this on EverCoach.